Welcome to this explainer. We are diving into one of the most absolutely wild business stories out there today. Millions of us grew up building entire worlds out of those little plastic bricks, right? And let's be honest, probably stepping on them in the middle of the night too. Today, Lego is an absolute juggernaut. It stands as one of the strongest, most universally loved brands on the planet. But we're going to unpack a massive contradiction here. Because back in the early 2000s, this absolute titan of the toy industry was bleeding cash so incredibly fast that financial experts were firmly convinced the company was going to vanish forever.
It really begs the question, doesn't it? How on earth could the world's most famous toy company, a brand with that level of unparalleled cultural love, come this close to total bankruptcy? I mean, it just seems impossible. At the time, it looked like they had the perfect strategy. They were expanding everywhere. But beneath the surface, the entire foundation was fracturing. And the real reason why is way more complicated than just a simple dip in sales.
They weren't just struggling a bit, they were literally weeks away from total financial collapse. We're talking about losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every single day. This wasn't a slow, gentle fade, it was a complete nosedive toward the concrete. So to understand how they eventually survived and pulled off one of the greatest business turnarounds in history, we've got to rewind. We have to see how a tiny little workshop in Denmark completely changed childhood forever.
Let's start with part 1, the foundation of play.
The story kicks off in Denmark during the Great Depression in the 1930s. There was this carpenter named Ole Kirk Christensen, and he started making wooden toys, really just to keep his business afloat. But then, disaster struck in the 1940s. A devastating fire completely leveled his workshop. And what I found so amazing in the research is that instead of throwing in the towel, this disaster actually became the catalyst for a massive pivot. He moved away from wood and embraced a relatively new material for the time, plastic. By 1958, the patent for the modern Lego brick was filed, and this specific design was totally revolutionary because of its clutch power. You know that incredibly satisfying way the bricks lock together firmly but can still be easily pulled apart? Post-World War II, this simple, genius little plastic brick sparked a massive global expansion. Now here's a fantastic piece of history that genuinely blew my mind. The name Lego itself, it actually comes from the Danish phrase "leg godt," which literally translates to play well. From day one, that name defined their unmatched quality standards. They were a family-owned company that obsessed over durability, precision, and the pure psychology of play. Taking child psychology that seriously was incredibly rare back then. It made them completely different from literally every other toy company out there. But this is also exactly where the story starts to get complicated. Which brings us to part 2, Success Creates a Crisis. As we roll into the late 90s and early 2000s, the entire toy industry experienced a massive, seismic shift. You had traditional, physical, analog toys. The world Lego completely dominated, suddenly going head-to-head with the absolute explosion of electronic entertainment. We are talking about the massive rise of Nintendo, the PlayStation, immersive video games. Boom! Suddenly, kids were spending all their free time staring at screens, and digital games were rapidly replacing physical toys. Combine that shift with intense competition from cheaper overseas manufacturers and immense pressure from big-box retailers, and Lego? Well, they went into a state of sheer panic. So how did they respond to this pressure? They launched a totally chaotic, panic-driven expansion. They completely convinced themselves that the only way to survive the digital threat was to transform into a full-blown lifestyle brand. We are talking opening entirely new theme parks, launching clothing lines, watches, jewelry, television shows, publishing wings. They even rolled out weird, heavily molded action figure lines like Galador that looked absolutely nothing like traditional Lego. In a desperate, frantic attempt to be everything to everyone, they completely lost focus on the one thing that actually made them great. And this created an absolute operational nightmare behind the scenes. Think about it. The core philosophy of Lego was always the classic brick. It's simple, right? It's universally interchangeable. But as they launched all those wild new product lines, they started manufacturing thousands of uniquely molded single-use pieces. From a business perspective, creating unique steel molds just to produce a single-use piece of plastic is incredibly, mind-bogglingly expensive. It entirely destroyed their manufacturing efficiency. Their operational complexity skyrocketed, costs went completely through the roof, and the simple, interchangeable system that was their greatest asset transformed into a bloated, insanely expensive mess. This takes us into part 3, On the Brink. By 2003, the climax of this crisis finally hit. The terrifying reality of their panic expansion caught up with them in a big way. They were staring down a massive cash flow crisis, essentially suffocating under roughly $800 million in debt. Major media outlets were openly reporting on their impending doom, and internal confusion was completely paralyzing the boardroom. As we talked about earlier, they were literally just weeks away from a total collapse. Revenues didn't just dip. They were in an absolute freefall, going right into 2004. You can see exactly why industry experts firmly believed the company was just going to disappear. The leadership was completely uncertain about how to stop the bleeding. The company was literally drowning in its own complexity, losing tremendous, irreplaceable value day after day. But then, what happened next changed the course of business history. Enter Jürgen Vig Knudstorp. Interestingly enough, he wasn't some traditional, seasoned toy industry veteran. Not at all. His background was actually in management consulting, so it was a highly surprising appointment, to say the least. But his specific leadership philosophy, his unique ability to look at this totally chaotic machine and identify exactly where the leaks were, that became the ultimate turning point for the entire brand. So let's break down exactly how he did it in part 4, the Great Turnaround. Knudstorp was ruthless, but honestly, it was absolute genius. Step 1, he immediately sold off the non-core businesses. Goodbye expensive theme parks, goodbye distracting lifestyle ventures. Step 2, he completely optimized their manufacturing by drastically cutting that massive inventory of unique single-use parts. He actually slashed the number of different pieces they produced from nearly 13,000 back down to roughly 6,000, which massively simplified the supply chain. And step 3, which was definitely the most important of all, he commanded a strict return to the core plastic brick. He reminded everyone in the company that their greatest asset was, and always had been, their foundational, interchangeable system. But here's the thing, fixing the operations was only half the battle. They still desperately needed to grow. And Knudstorp realized something brilliant. Instead of fighting the massive cultural shift toward movies and video games, LEGO should just partner with them. I mean, look at these franchises: Star Wars, Harry Potter, Marvel, DC, Disney. By securing these massive intellectual property licenses, they fundamentally transformed from just a traditional toy company into a global creative platform. They perfectly merged the cinematic worlds that kids were already obsessed with directly with the physical building experience. It was a total game changer. And they definitely didn't stop with kids either. They leaned heavily into community-driven innovation. They realized there was this massive, entirely untapped market of adult LEGO fans out there. So they started creating complex, visually beautiful sets like LEGO Architecture and highly engineered technical lines like LEGO Technic. They pushed hard into STEM education and robotics with LEGO Mindstorms. They even created LEGO Ideas, this amazing platform where actual fans could design and vote on future sets to be made. They massively expanded their audience simply by realizing that play wasn't just for children anymore. Moving into our final section, Part 5, Building the Future. When you stack LEGO up today against traditional toy industry titans like Mattel or Hasbro, the numbers are just absolutely astronomical. We're talking about a brand valuation and annual revenue that completely towers over the competition. They operate these massive, state-of-the-art global factories, and the sheer volume of bricks they produce annually is staggering. They're selling roughly 7 sets every single second. That gives them a dominant, totally undeniable global market share. This turnaround didn't just save the company, it catapulted them to the absolute peak of the industry. However, you've got to look at the reality. The biggest challenge is actually still ahead of them. Objectively, they are heavily reliant on plastic production, which obviously brings very valid environmental and carbon emission criticisms. They also face the constant, never-ending threat of mobile gaming, digital entertainment, cheap counterfeit bricks, and patent expirations. But they aren't just standing still. They are heavily investing in bio-based plastics and highly sustainable manufacturing processes. They are also actively exploring how to safely integrate AI and augmented reality to assist physical play, all without ever losing that tactile, hands-on magic of the brick itself. And that brings us to our final thought for today. LEGO almost completely disappeared because success tempted them to forget what made them unique in the first place. It's exactly like the quote says. Sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built by adding more pieces. They're built by remembering which pieces truly matter. LEGO ultimately survived by stripping away all the noise, all the distractions, and rediscovering the sheer power of simplicity. It really makes you wonder, in your own life or your own business, what is your foundational brick that you might be losing focus on? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. The world is constantly changing, and now you understand exactly why.
Thanks for watching World Decoded. Make sure to like and share, subscribe, and stay curious.